Good afternoon, everyone. Um, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, salam kebajikan untuk kita semua. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. If I can see and someone still sitting on the back, can I ask you to come forward so that the seats are filled and we can have a fruitful discussion today. Let me introduce myself first. My name is Karissa Chawaldi. I'm the Chief of Public Affairs for PT Pembiayaan Digital Indonesia, ada kami, and also representing Kadin today for our panel discussion, which the topic today will be cyber risk resilience, strengthening and prioritizing your digital defenses. This is a collaboration by Indonesia Chamber of Commerce, Kadin, and also ASEAN Business Advisory Council, alongside with AFTEC, the FinTech Associations of Indonesia, Investor Trust, and also Armor, which we are joined here today by our friends from Armor, and also ada kami to discuss the most pressing issues of cybersecurity, which I think this is a very important topic that we will discuss today, given the fact that Indonesia, the landscape of cyber security in Indonesia is very important as we are also entering the roadmap of Golden Indonesia for 2045 for the better digital transformations in Indonesia. So I think I would like to give the floor first for Bapak Bernardino Vega as the alternate chair for ASEAN Business Advisory Council to give a welcome speech and remarks. Silakan Pak.
Yeah, terima kasih. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to also acknowledge AFPI as the Association of FinTech Lending in Indonesia. Of course, our guests from Armor, Randolph, Miguel, and Anaya. And every one of you, good afternoon. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera bagi kita semua. Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, salam kebajikan. If you didn't understand what I just said, I greeted the audience with the six faiths that Indonesia has. We have Islam, Christian, Buddhist, Hindu, and also Confucius. So we are a very diverse community, and that's how we acknowledge one another. But anyway, thank you very much for being here. I'm really appreciative of this topic that we'll be discussing today. I'm friends from Kadin and also from the FinTech Association. It's a topic that is near and dear to our hearts, and it's important and timely to raise because over the last few years, as the digitalization in Indonesia has really exponentially gained in activities, cybersecurity becomes more and more important. Earlier this year, some of the platforms that we were in our industry, we experienced several attacks, right? And the latest attack that we experienced last January was deepfake, right? Where people register to apply for a loan, and they clone their ID, and you could clone the conversation, the face features, and so that's a form of cyber attack that we've just experienced, and it goes on and on. So this is great to have our friends from Armor to be able to discuss, and thank you very much, Karissa, for being willing to moderate this important topic. And again, thank you for everyone to be here. Again, it's just discussions. We could have a dialogue. I think we have some friends that are very curious on some of your insights. Another thing I'd like to remind, our event is being streamed. So I think we can get a recording after this if you'd like. Okay, so thank you very much again, and enjoy the dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak. So I think that was a quick introduction of why it is very important for us to have this topic today. But I really want to give a flavor of why this is important for not just the fintech industry, but across all sectors as well. Because I think the fact that cyber threat landscape in Indonesia is a real thing that must be approached collaboratively within the private sectors, the government, and also individuals as well. And I just want to share some stats as well. So over half of Indonesian business, so 52% of Indonesian business reported experiences of cyber attacks last year. So it's almost half of Indonesia business, whether it's large, medium, and small. So this hits across all sectors. And data loss is the primary concern of the organizations in Indonesia. So 82% people in Indonesia experiences data loss. And this is something that happened across the private sectors and also the government's sectors as well. And there's another data which is very interesting, which says that 70% of Indonesian organizations being concerned about reputational damage and business interruption as the cause of cyber attacks. So I think we all can agree that this topic is very important, and I think Indonesia, alongside with other neighboring countries in ASEAN, share the same concern. And I think with that, this is also why we have our friends from Armor here today joining us. And we do hope that during our discussion today, we can have a deep and thorough insight of the current situation in digital defense, along with the most innovative solutions and strategies that we can adopt to enhance our cybersecurity measures as well. So without further ado, let me introduce you to our three prominent speakers. Mr. Miguel Clarke, if you can stand up. So Miguel Clarke is a former FBI agent, a GRC and cybersecurity evangelist. And our second speaker, Mr. Randolph Oudemans, which is the Director of Sales and Business Development of Asia Pacific Armor. And our last speaker is Ananya Amin. She's the Managing Director for Asia Pacific of Armor. And I'm giving the floor now to Miguel, which he is going to share real-life experiences as well, and his expertise in global cybersecurity issues and how to deal with cybersecurity attacks and threats, and also risk mitigations as well. So hand it over to you, Miguel.
Wonderful. Good afternoon. It's the middle of the morning for me, way back in Dallas. So if I add up all the time that I spent traveling here, it's somewhere around 29 to 30 hours. So if we can put the rest of the presentation on screen here, that I can kind of step through this a little bit and make sure that the microphone is good. So we talked a little bit about cybersecurity. I think it's important when we talk about cybersecurity to also talk a little bit about resilience. Cybersecurity is what we do, and protecting the data is kind of like why we do it. And resilience, the purpose of security is to ensure resilience, to make sure that after an event that you're able to get back on your feet and understanding what it takes for that to happen. So, what's in it here for me? Why are you here? What are you looking to accomplish in the time that we have here? So I'm going to give some real world examples. And one of the things that I was told is really important is for people to kind of accept, and you already heard that 52% of Indonesian businesses have been impacted by cybersecurity issues, right, breaches. But every time we go and we talk to somebody, they tell me their defenses are good. They tell me that, oh yeah, we're okay, right, that's fine. And they also ask the question, which is something that I saw also when I was in the FBI, well, why would anybody want to attack me? Like, why would I ever be a victim? So my answer, okay, if you're in business, then you're an attractive target, right? If you make money and somebody's paying you, then you're going to be an attractive target. So moving on. I'm going to talk a little bit about quantifying risk I think in the industry, we are really, really good at talking about threats, right? There's a lot of fear, there's a lot of uncertainty that we talk about, and we create a lot of doubt. And then trying to sell into that environment is not particularly helpful. So what I want to do is to kind of change that conversation and turn it into a conversation about risk quantity, so that the decision makers in the room, the decision makers that are listening and watching Facebook Live, hey everybody, good to see you guys. Wish you could have been here. It's going to be way more fun here. All right, but that said, making really defensible decisions as leaders, right? That's what the expectation is. The people who put you in a position of leadership, the ones that follow you, the people whose money you're responsible for, their expectation is that you're going to be good at this, right? And so we'll get into that a little bit later on. So board of directors and we want to enable a board of directors to be able to actively manage risk. That's the job of the board from a business context, is to understand and manage risk. And so we'll talk about quantification of risk is going to be one of those ways that will allow us to do a better job. And if I am speaking too quickly, anybody please raise your hand and say, slow down, slow is better, right? For the first time in my life, I used to run track and fast was really important, but now slow is better. Okay. There is a price tag for not taking action as well. So hopefully, I won't specifically go into that, but hopefully you'll see from all the different examples. So this gives an idea as to what we're going to cover. So you guys heard that was in the FBI. That's not me on the other side over here. One of them is me, right? One is me, one is not me. So in that picture there, we are on our way to do actually, I wouldn't take a picture before we did the search warrant. So we've already done the search warrant there. That's why I have a smile on my face and I'm in such a good mood in that picture, because we went out and it was crimes against children. And so people were doing things they should not have done, and we're talking about tender age, under the age of 10 or 11 from a victim standpoint. So we did a search warrant on someone's house. We took a lot of information from that search warrant, and then we ended up putting that person in jail. And if I remember correctly, they probably got between 15 to 20 years of time in federal prison. Right? What I like to put up there is there's a little bit of, most people have heard of FBI. Not very many people have met an FBI agent. So I want to at least put that up there and acknowledge that. And I understand the only reason why people in the room probably is because I was in the FBI. Nobody wants to hear a salesperson talk about cybersecurity, but I love cybersecurity. Right, both of these are me. I have proficiency up here because when we talk about cybersecurity, we always talk about threats. We always talk about cost and cyber tools. But I never hear anybody talk about how they practice to be able to defend themselves, right? Oh, I have security. I've bought a service. Okay, well, tell me how proficient you are with that service or with the tools that you're using. Effective security requires proficiency. Anytime you've seen anything that you're impressed with, what impresses you is their proficiency in whatever it is that they're doing. So developing a proficiency as it relates to cybersecurity is a core tenet of cybersecurity. We must do that. So FBI agents are required to practice firearms 4 times per year. And there is a course of fire. It includes about 55 to 60 rounds, and it is timed, right? So you start, hands by your side. In 3 seconds, grab that pistol, put 3 rounds, and then back in your holster. 3 seconds, 3 rounds, 3 seconds. Is the line ready? The line is ready. Wait for the tone. 3 rounds, 3 seconds, and it needs to be on a target like this from the 3-yard line. So keep going further back and further back. If you meet an FBI agent, if you see an FBI agent, understand and know that he or she is proficient in firearms. Right, and then over there on the left there, that is actually a Tommy gun, like the one that Al Capone, when the FBI agents had, and Al Capone way back in the 1920s, the old gangsters. So I just wanted to include that in there. All right, practical applications. This is from the FBI Academy, these pictures from the FBI Academy. The picture down at the bottom is one of the ones that I had taken when I was at the Academy, and I was serving as a counselor for new agents back in 2018. And the reason why I have that in there, because one of the main things that we do at the Academy is develop the practical applications, right? So why is that important, right? You saw before, You learn how to shoot. That is a technical skill. That is a tactical skill. But then knowing when to shoot, when you should apply those skills, that's the practical application piece. The entire FBI Academy is about training individuals, taking people who've never had no experience, train those individuals, get them up to a high level of skill, and then teach them how to apply that. And by application, you'll have a problem, and the 3 tools that we use to solve the problems, we'll ask somebody, hey, will you stop doing that or go over there? And then if that doesn't work, then we'll tell them, this is what you're going to do. And then if that doesn't work, we have trained and trained and trained to make them do what we've asked them to do. And we're very effective at that. Right. So the FBI part is kind of like out of the way here. And so hopefully everybody feels like, yes, I got a few FBI stories. It was worth it for me to get on an airplane and fly for 2 hours to come see this guy speak for like 20 or 30 minutes. All right. Cybersecurity today, why are we really talking about this? Carissa, I think you've really kind of set the stage, especially as it relates to Indonesia. And what I like to do is to go beyond and set that stage for the globe, right, for the world. This is the environment that we're operating in. Those numbers are a little bit low. For this year, we should think about somewhere in the neighborhood of $9.5 trillion, right? It is approximately 7% of global GDP. So for everything you do, 7% of that is kind of going away, and the bad guys are able to capture that and then monetize what it is that they're doing. If you looked at it as an economy, it would be the world's 3rd largest economy, right? The average cost of a US data breach is about $9.4 million when you include all the different costs that are associated with that, with a breach. For the international cost, that's somewhere around 4.5 million. Right, and those numbers are coming from the IBM cost of a data breach report from 2023. You can look up those numbers, right? We don't have any ownership over them, right? The last kind of box that's down there I think is important. There was a study that was done in the United States that 60% of small to medium businesses will go out of business within 2 years after a breach. So the cost is very, very, very high for organizations that are impacted. So moving on. In the time that it takes to read the slide, $14.8 million will be lost. All right, before we finish this session, and this was based on a 1-hour session, before we finish this session, it'll be close to $1 billion of loss because we're running a little bit longer than like a 45-minute session. So you'll have an opportunity to have these discussions. So every calendar day, over $21 billion lost. Right? It's significant. So if you think about the entire global narcotics trade, opium, cocaine, every one of these, this is somewhere in the neighborhood of about, I'd say about 550-ish billion, roughly, somewhere in that neighborhood. It's about 10 times bigger than all of narcotics across the world. It's a bigger problem than if you took every single national disaster, right, that happened anywhere in the world, the cost of it and the cost to remediate those natural disasters. Cybercrime is a bigger problem than any of those from a financial standpoint, right? Just to give you an indication as to why it is that we're doing what we are doing. So I think somebody obligated me to talk about common cybersecurity breaches. So we'll talk a little bit about that, a little bit about phishing. These are, I won't go into detail to defining them. There are other folks that do that very well, but I just want to put a list up there of what those problems are likely to look like for the businesses that you care about and the businesses in this country. Phishing, you have malware and ransomware are significant issues. Zero-day type of attacks are very difficult to defend because the zero-day attack is one that nobody's ever seen before. So when it hits you, that's day 0, right? Actually, that's day 1, but when they create it, it's day 0. So it's very, very difficult for you to take action against something that you've never seen before. The next thing that you'll see are denial of service attacks, which and many times if they can't steal information from you because your defenses are pretty good, then they just try to knock you offline so you can't do any business at all. And then the next thing that we're seeing that is very sophisticated are the supply chain type of attacks. So if they can't directly attack a company, then they will go after their suppliers, the people who actually provide information or providing services to you. So a word about services, tools, and controls. This is just a sample, of how many different services and tools there are out there. And it's not intended for you to be able to read it. Obviously, it's a lot. Okay, and so when somebody says, we have security, right? You show up and you want to find out, you're thinking about doing business with a company, and they tell you, we have security. Well, this is kind of what they mean. They bought something, right? So if you buy a car, you have a car. It doesn't mean you can drive. And I know I probably shouldn't be talking about driving in Jakarta, should I? Okay, anyway, I'll move on with that. But it's really, really difficult to be proficient with so many different tools. How do you know what those tools are actually doing, right? Nobody that buys the tools talks about how they train with the tools, and they don't talk about how their security has changed as a result of partnering with the service. If you do anything, you go out and you buy something, you expect something to change. You expect to look different, right? You might want to look taller, like me. You might want to look a little bit slimmer in those areas. And so you buy something to have an effect. But there are so many people out there who are buying cybersecurity tools, services, solutions, and partnerships, and it's having no effect on their posture. Okay, that's one of the things that's wrong with security. So talked about it from like a global sense, talked a little bit about it from the sense of the purchaser. Now let's start thinking about the CEO and the CFO, right? The chief executive officer, chief financial officer. They're the ones paying the bill for the cybersecurity services. And yet, none of us do a very good job telling you exactly what it is that you're buying. Right? We don't give you any guarantees. There's no cybersecurity professional that's going to guarantee that you're not going to get hit. They will say, hey, yeah, I'm really good at detecting this one certain kind of thing. It's like me saying, oh, I can detect whether or not there's sugar in this tea. And you're like, I don't care. Right? Tell me how that impacts me. Tell me how that changes my security posture. So let's try to answer that question for them. Right? Two things when I think about cybersecurity. Is it efficient? Is it effective? Right? Those are the two things that I need to know. Efficiency and effectiveness. So are we good at what we do? Right? That's an efficiency question. And the effectiveness, do we do those things well? Do we have enough cybersecurity? Right? These are questions that every time I go somewhere and I talk to somebody, nobody has ever asked them that. Like, how much money should you spend on cybersecurity? I mean, has anybody ever been asked that question? Are we spending enough? Has any person who's at that executive level asked, hey, are we spending enough money on cybersecurity related to the risks that we incur as a business? Right? That is a board of directors type question. And then when they give you an answer about what they think, the next question should be really, how do we know, or how would we know? And the ways that we would know are, we want to increase the cost to the adversary to conduct their attacks against our networks and against anything that we own, like in our environment. We want to make it difficult for them to operate. And if our security, if I can articulate that, if you can, if your security partners can articulate that, we make it more difficult for the adversary, and here is how. That's one piece. The second piece is I also have to make it easier for you, the people who are defending the networks, the people who have a vested interest in defending the networks. At the end of the day, most businesses have investors, right? That means that for what you do on a daily basis, you're doing that with somebody else's money, right? And the people who have given you money, invested in your business, expect that you as an organization are going to be much better than you've demonstrated that you are, that I've demonstrated that I am. That's the expectation. Nobody likes to lose money. Well, I haven't met anybody, but I've also never been here before. So is there anybody here that likes to lose money? Right? No hands went up for all the people, Facebook. We have to do a better job. In the event of a breach, your company is not going to be treated like you're the victim of a breach, right? Because the investors aren't going to see you as a victim of the breach. They're going to think that you should be much better at securing their investment than you are. That is exactly the way that they're going to feel. Every time I've responded to a computer intrusion when I was in the FBI, it was the same thing, right? They're like, oh, nobody feels bad for us. Like, no, because you were in business, you're using other people's money, and they trusted you, and you should have done better, right? Any parents in the room, people who have children, right? Yes, okay. So if you hire somebody to babysit your child and then something happens to that child while they're babysitting, Who's the first person you blame? Do you blame the kid? No, you blame the babysitter, even if the babysitter didn't do anything wrong. You emotionally want to blame the babysitter. And in this case, as we are in business, we are effectively babysitters for the finances for them. All right, so let's move on. So you start to think about efficiency. How much security is enough? We've already asked that question. The only way to answer the question, is my security enough, is for me to understand the value of what I do, right? How much are we going to lose, or could we lose, if things go wrong? If we don't have a good grasp on what it's going to cost during a breach, like for us, for our businesses specifically, then it's going to be very difficult for us to determine whether or not we have enough security, right? And when we start to compare security or risk, and we start to pull these two things together, now we are talking about, is our level of risk acceptable? Right? What decisions can we make to lower the amount of risk that we're exposed to? And maybe can we partner our way out of some of that risk? Or can we purchase some additional security and then mitigate some of that risk that way? Okay. So I've talked really theoretical about a couple of things. So is everybody okay if we move on to some breaches that actually happened? And then I can give you a retired FBI agent's take on that. Okay? Anybody objecting to that? There were no objections. All right, good. So MGM, everybody familiar with MGM and who they are? Huge global brand. At the time, this was, let's say, in August of last year, they were worth about $13.5 trillion US, 13.55 exactly. That's what their market cap was. And so what happened is, and these guys have a significant cybersecurity team. Right, so they have a lot of trained professionals that were working on this problem. But a hacker found employee information on LinkedIn, picked up the telephone and called, and then did some impersonations. And as a result of using that person, his voice, and phishing, a human-enabled kind of like malware, human-enabled technical attack, they were able to get in and get some passwords reset and then get access. And then that's what allowed the ransomware to get into that system. So the human technical interface is really important, and it's easily exploitable. Anytime there's a human being, it's easy to exploit human beings. It's very, very simple. And so I talked about 13.5 billion. They reported this was some type of a cybersecurity issue that they reported unironically on September 11th. So what did that mean to individuals who were there? Some people couldn't check into their hotel rooms, right? The room keys weren't working. And they needed to go to a manual process. So here's a casino and resorts, and they can't do the casino thing, and they're really having a difficult time doing the resort thing. All right, so by the 20th, you see that their value fell from 13.5 billion to 12.5 billion, right? And that was a period of 9 days. But do you think that when they report the cybersecurity issue and what it costs, that they're including the cost of their market dropping? Of course not. They said it was a $100 million exercise for them. That's all they said that it was, right? But I would say that it's probably more than that. We've got $100 million in direct costs, and then we've got somewhere in the neighborhood of, probably about almost $1 billion in cost. Now let's go to a little bit of insight into that. Right? I think that breach is a wake-up call, because I personally believe that MGM knew they had a problem before they got hit. Right? I believe that. I believe that there was a dollar amount that they could spend to fix that problem. They probably had a vendor, not unlike Armor, come in and say, hey, we want to sell you something, and we've done an assessment for you, and we think you really need to take action against this server, and we need to do it right now. Right? Like, it's really important. Anytime you talk to a cybersecurity professional, they want you to take that action right now. And you'll hear that mostly through kind of like the sales apparatus. So when you think about the fact that they knew, and I feel very, very confident, I can't say that I know or how, but I feel very confident they knew they had an issue. Now, I think that in order to remediate that issue, they were going to have to take their systems offline. right? And they would have to figure out a way to bring those things down gracefully, and that would have caused them to lose some money. And I'd be willing to bet the amount of money they would have lost would have been more than $10 or $15 million, okay? I also believe that the Chief Information Security Officer did not feel that he had a position of authority to say, I'm going to independently bring down these systems and cost our organization $10 million. Anybody in the room feel comfortable making a $10 million decision, right? By yourself, based on your level of authority that you have in your position? Probably not. So you know what you do? You put the decision off and you say, it's going to be okay, right? The breach happens, it wasn't okay. So by not wanting to accept a $10 million or 15 or maybe even as much as a $25 million decision, you cost the company, by my count, somewhere in the neighborhood of about $1.1 billion by failing to act. That's a cost of indecision right there. And when you talk to companies about cybersecurity, a lot of times they think that they have more time than they do, right? Most companies in the United States were compliant. If they have a compliance requirement, most companies that get breached were compliant at the time of breach, right? So compliance isn't going to, you won't be able to protect yourself with compliance. Compliance is a moment in time look, and then does this fit what I'm supposed to fit in this moment of time? And from a compliance standpoint, yes, you can answer that question, but it's not the same as having security. All right, so what about SolarWinds? Anybody know anything about SolarWinds organization? So they are really kind of consider themselves like a security type company. And so let's take a look at them. The United States Securities and Exchange Commission decided they were going to file a civil lawsuit against SolarWinds as a result of them not protecting the data, right? And the Chief Information Security Officer is named in that. He's the first person named, I think Timothy G. Brown, if I remember correctly. Why should any of us know Timothy Brown, right? We shouldn't. But the Securities and Exchange Commission said, yes, you know what, this is an issue. So what SolarWinds said is that we had gotten attacked by an advanced persistent threat. There's no way we could have defended ourselves, right? That is what they said at the time. So the reason why they're in trouble is because they overstated their security expertise, right? So that's kind of like first bullet point there. And if the government of the United States has looked at the emails that were sent within SolarWinds, and they determined that somebody in the company knew, and they were concealing the fact that, hey, this problem, you should have recognized it was a big problem, but then you said, oh, I don't have to worry about that. That's not that big of a problem, and they moved on, right? Somebody in the company forced either the CEO, the CISO, this Chief Information Security Officer, did it on his own, or somebody basically said, this is what our public statement is going to be. The CISO, Mr. Brown, made those statements, and now being charged with making materially false statements as a result of that, right? So think about if your boss tells you, it's like, this is our company position, this is what we're going to do. Most of us wouldn't have a concern with saying, okay, well, you're the boss, let's figure that out. But the boss's name isn't listed on the lawsuit, right? It's his name. So I think it's important as you start to think about what cybersecurity means. Eventually, I think every organization in every country, whether publicly held or privately held, is going to be held to this very same standard that you see up here. All right, so just a little bit of background on who attacked them. Sunburst, that's APT-29, I believe that is Russia. And I'm not in the US, so I got to be very careful about what I say because Russians are everywhere. So I will just say that the malware lived on a cybersecurity system that was providing cybersecurity tools to many different customers, and it lived there for more than 275 days, right? And these are people who are cybersecurity professionals. Trust me, I know what I'm doing, right? And their defense was, there's no way that I could have known that. And that defense didn't fly. So they have more than 18,000 customers, right? Now, if you look at them now, they would say, hey, we're okay now, we recovered from that. But I would assume that there's going to be fines and penalties that they're going to have to pay going forward as a result. Okay, So those are some real companies that are there. So I thought maybe we could work through a little bit of an exercise with the company I just made up this morning. Is that okay? All right. So Jaya Capital is actually run by CEO. That's Jules. That's my Rottweiler. I love dogs. So I'm making her the president of the company. So let's talk a little bit about what this company is and what it does, right? It's fintech, founded in 2000. Revenue somewhere in the neighborhood of about 100 million. Really bridging technology and finance together, capitalizing on the advantages that AI brings, and really just kind of going into blockchain, right, to be able to have some resilience against financial transactions, right, tampering, so you have these, the ability to really be agile, right, and not tied to any one particular bank or one particular region or anything like that. So we've got a little mission statement that made up this morning. And so let's go through kind of what could go wrong for this company, right? If they get breached, it's likely that digital forensics is going to cost them somewhere in the neighborhood of about $5 million to remediate. Right? You heard about SolarWinds earlier. They had 279 days the adversary was in their network. Now let's just assume that this company is much better than that, and it's only 29 days that they are breached. Right? That cost there of lost revenue is $7.9 million for that company. And you mentioned earlier reputational losses. So yeah, from a reputational loss standpoint, around 5% is reasonable. Now, when you look at the cost of maybe having something like managed detection and response and putting that up so that you can see everything that's going on in the network, right? For a company like that, it'll probably cost less than $500,000 a year versus the likely total losses of $18.4 million, right? So where's the best place to focus on what you're going to spend or what you're trying to protect, right? And you think about it in your own lives. If anybody buys insurance, you're not thinking about the cost of insurance. You're thinking about the thing that you insured, right? If you're going to buy like a really nice engagement ring, that might not be a big thing here, but in the United States, people have been known to spend lots of money on like an engagement ring. I'm going to do something really nice for the person that I love. Well, you're going to go get it appraised so you know how much it is, and then you're probably going to get it insured. Right? So this is understanding what's at stake is really important. We don't really do a very good job of that. So some of you guys, they're saying, wow, that's really cool, Miguel, but where's the math? Right? For those of you who love math, when you start to think about annual revenues and the way that I've broken this down, I've got a reputational loss estimate, which I've given you, that's around 5%. Most organizations now have intellectual property. How do you value your intellectual property? What's the value of it? How much does it cost? What would it cost you if you lost it? For most organizations, you got a business. But I'm being really, really generous here, and I'm going to say that the digital assets or intellectual property is only going to be like 10 million of that 100 million. And they're really effective at taking that asset and turning it into profits. Okay, so average per day, $274 per day is what we're talking about in revenues. So if they're down for 29 days, that's what the losses are there, right? So when you start to think about what things that you can do, I always make this recommendation. So for those of you who are like, okay, why is this guy just talking about threats and that's all it is, right? You want to get better tomorrow, form an incident response team with capable people on the team, right? Make an incident response plan and practice that plan, right? Is there anybody in the room who has never been or participated in a fire drill, right? Fire drill, anybody that's never done that? So, all right, so maybe ask the different questions so we can see some hands go up. Raise your hands, please, if you've ever done a fire drill at some point in time. Please, fire drill, yes, no? Okay, so you have this practice that you've done, so you know what to do in the event of an emergency. It's really important, right? That's how you know, don't take the elevator, right? That's how you understand these things that will save your life eventually, is because you practice. So that's what I recommend. Form an incident response team, make sure it's got talented people on it, make an incident response plan, practice. And then when you practice, right, you do a tabletop exercise, how good is my plan? When you find holes in the plan, when you find things that don't work, make changes, do it all over again. That's the free advice, right? That is one of the things as an FBI agent who has responded to well over 100 of these things. I would say you do that and it gets better because now you're building in some countermeasures that give you an opportunity so that you stand a chance against the adversary. Right. So everything that I'm talking about here really kind of builds into like risk management maturity, making good decisions, having those decisions result in you having an improving cyber posture so that you can protect, your information or the information security. So if I think about risk management and maturity and what's that going to look like, and I know that's really difficult. That was not a good move on my part. Okay, it's really difficult to see some of what's on the slide here, so I'll talk about the different cybersecurity experience and maturity levels going forward, and based on some really rough preliminary data, where you're likely to find most businesses in the region, right? And I would say 70%, probably closer to 90%, are going to be in the first two. Right. Number one, they're going to be really prevention focused. That's the darker green that's there. So these are the individuals that don't necessarily have a plan in place, and they may not necessarily have tools, right? They're just out here doing business because they love doing the business. And so you see that very early on with these businesses. You have a business like Jaya Capital that I had up there before. If they grew really quickly, then it's likely that they have not really started to think about the impact of cybersecurity, and they don't have an individual who's in charge of making sure that they're secure there. The other thing that you see at that level is that information technology and operational technology roles are the same as the security role, right? And I think that is a pretty significant problem because if you have a problem, let's say somebody has a medical problem, you want to go to a specialist, right? And if you need surgery, you want to go to a surgeon who's going to do the surgeries for you. Now, usually the person who's doing the surgery isn't the person who diagnosed you, right? They get more specialized as you go on up and the problems get bigger. So that's the prevention focus. The detection focus, hey, they figured this out. Like, we know we've got to do more than prevent. Now we've got to be able to detect threats. And these are the things they ask you. I need to be able to detect threats on my network. They go out and they buy lots and lots of tools, and those tools will give those detections for them. These individuals, again, have a lot of tools, but they can't say how these tools are operating together, and they don't have a lot of policies around responding and creating some type of resilience within the organization. So that is kind of like your protection focus. And I would say 30% of the folks that you find are likely to find in that, right? The next level up are folks that are like, okay, yeah, we understand all of this and we have really good processes in place. So when we make a change or we experience an event or an incident, we can change policies, we apply those policies, and our posture gets better. So these are the ones that are actually moving, they're learning, right? They can answer those questions for, hey, what has changed if you've had this vendor or these tools in place for a year or a year and a half? What's changed? And they'll be able to answer that question for you. Okay, when we first got the tools, we didn't really have a good idea what was going on in our infrastructure, and then that changed when we put the tools in. We made these other different policy changes, like when an employee gets fired or they get terminated. We put a process in place to reclaim their devices and reclaim their data so that they don't continue to have connectivity to our networks. So those are your process-oriented. And then the risk-adaptive folks, they're only speaking in terms of risk. And they understand the quantification of risk and the impact that it's going to have on their business. And they can say things like this: if we get hit with ransomware next week on Monday, it will probably take us 6 days for us to be able to recover from backup, because we recover from backup like 2 or 3 times a year, so we know. Now, if it only hits this area, we'll be able to recover in literally like a day and a half. Like, we understand that if the breach is limited to this. So they understand that the actions that the adversary takes, they understand what the impact will be on their ability to get back to normal business, right? I know we're not doing questions right now, so I'll move on to the next thing. So what I've been talking about all this time, and you'll hear from Ananya a little bit later on, is a holistic approach to cybersecurity, which involves mindset, right? That's leadership, that's culture, that's confidence, your beliefs, the attitudes that you have about cybersecurity. It involves skills, your skill set, how much you practice, how good you are with the tools, how quickly can you learn. And then you've got the tools, and those are like your partnerships and the services that are available. Those are things that you can buy. You can buy tools, you can't buy mindset, and you can't buy skill set. But in order for you to have a resilient organization, you need to have the right mindset. You need to practice with those tools and understand what they do and the impact that they have on your risk posture. And then also having the right tools in place. It's super important, but it is not of primary importance, even though I find most organizations are very tool and service heavy. When you ask them if they have security, they'll tell you about the tools, and I think that that's a mistake. All right, so key insights that we have here. For the most part, you would think that breaches are very, very sophisticated. Typically not. It's something very simple. We heard about it in the MGM case. It was a telephone call to the help desk. I mean, what technology do you buy to protect yourself against that? I don't know. I haven't seen it yet. So when you start to think about detection and response times, if you go back to SolarWinds, 277 days. So the detection times and the response times, they're abysmal. It's really bad. Continuity, business continuity, people don't really emphasize a business continuity plan. Like, okay, let me practice recovering from a bad event. Physical events, typically yes. Digital events, typically no. So the real question that we could ask here for those of you Facebook Live, are you more likely to live through an earthquake, or is your organization more likely to get hit with a cyber attack or breach of some sort, right? Business email compromise or ransomware. And I would say the likelihood is really, really high on the cyber attack. All right. So third-party impacts. I have another slide in another presentation that shows that 19% of cyber breaches were happened through a third party. So in the event, if we were to go back a slide or two, and then we put you at the very highest level of cybersecurity maturity and you're doing everything right, if you trust another organization, another partner, then 20% of the time the breach is coming through your partner. Right? So third-party risk management is very, very important when you start to think about your risk portfolio. Cloud misfigurations are another source of things that can go wrong. And AI, everybody's talking about AI. AI is going to make the problem 10 times worse before it has an opportunity to make it 5% better. Right? That's just the way that it is. And a number of organizations, almost every organization I've ever been to and visited has had legacy systems that they're supporting well beyond the time that the vendor actually intended. And so that's another area that causes a problem. All right, let's move on to some of my favorite things here. So in closing, Mike Tyson is one of my favorite athletes, and one of his quotes that he uses that everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face, right? So lots of people faced Mike Tyson. Lots of people said what they were going to do to Mike Tyson. Mike Tyson punched them in the face, and like 30 of those individuals went down in the first or second round, right? So I think this applies to cybersecurity. And the reason why it applies is because having a plan is not enough. You actually do have to work through, practice that plan, and then practice, taking those hits. Anytime you see any type of a contest, and if the contest is televised, you know that those folks have been on offense and on defense, and they've practiced going through what they're going to face. It's very important. All right, so we talked a little bit about resilience. This is a photo that I took when I was in Japan. Most of the folks that are in here are either intelligence community or law enforcement in Japan. This is a world famous Noma dojo that dates back to the Edo period. There, it burned down and it had come back, and so that's part of the reason why I have that up there as a resilience slide, because this dates back, I think, like 14th century if you go back that far. So just a lot of culture that's there. You have the hint of folks that are practicing for combat that's really kind of implied there as well. And the ultimate resilience statement, I would say, is that, in a conflict, I never lose. And this is kind of like my personal motto, I never lose. I'm either going to learn or I'm going to win. And so I really love that Nelson Mandela quote. And this is the mindset that I think if we start to approach cybersecurity problems with, then things will change. And I will end with another FBI story. And hopefully I'm not over time or anything like that. Does anybody want me to not tell an FBI story? All right, so I will tell one more FBI story, I promise. So after retiring, I started asking some of my FBI friends, some other retired folks, and people who were still in the FBI, and I asked the question. I said, if you were walking down the street and somebody jumped on you and started beating you up, right? And then you get up and then you try to deal with the problem the best way that you can. The person runs away. Will you consider yourself, if you're an FBI agent, will you consider yourself to be a victim? Every single FBI agent that I have ever talked to said no, right? So imagine that. If you put yourself in that same situation and you were walking down the street minding your business and somebody jumps on you and they start punching you, you pick up the phone, you call the police, and you say, you know what, I'm the victim, something bad happened to me. That's not what FBI agents think. They think that they're combative, they're combatants. I was in a fight. It doesn't matter whether I win or lose, I was in a fight and I fought, right? And so what this means to me is that with a change of mindset, a very simple change of mindset, we can eliminate all victims of cybercrime and turn everybody who's a victim today or who's a victim yesterday into a combatant tomorrow. No more victims, right? So that's my FBI story, and it's time for us to put together the cybersecurity panel, which I believe is next, and so I'll hand this back over to you.
Thank you, Miguel. Please give a round of applause for Miguel, and please join us. Miguel, please join us here, and Randolph as well, and Ananya. Please join me on stage for us to kind of have a panel discussion on the things that Miguel was just really said about that really catches me is the change of mindset, right? That's a very very hard thing to do, and I really want to know, like with the change of mindset, change of tool set, like how do you make sure that these things cost like a long-term investment, right, for security solutions? Like how do you make sure that we are as an organization are investing the right amount of resources and money for protecting the cyber threat issues in our organizations?
Okay, so I touched on it in the presentation. I think, again, if you form an incident response team, right? So get good, talented people who are going to be there whose job it is to protect you. That's really important. If you were to go do something dangerous, you'd want a team of people there that would help you chart a safe course through that. Right? So this is what we're talking about. That is what your incident response team should do. And it shouldn't just be technical people. It should be security, physical security should be a part of that, HR. So you want a multidisciplinary team, because how do you know whether or not somebody inside the company is helping somebody outside of the company? You won't know. So you want to make sure that team is diverse and has a bunch of different disciplines. And you'll want attorneys on the team, all of that. Right? So then once you have the team, now you form a plan. You say, here's what we are going to do in the event that we get hit with ransomware. Who do I need to call? Right? Do I have that person's phone number? Is it readily accessible? How quickly does it take to answer the phone? Right? These things, so you start to understand how quickly can I start to bring resources to bear on the problem. And then as you go through and you practice that, that's where the resilience comes from. Right? And I've been to a couple of companies that have been breached, and they had a security person who had that mindset, right? And one of them was Ericsson. Ericsson, before it was Sony Ericsson, they got hit by a hacker by the name of Saba Richter, and he had just gone all around the different networks. So some of it was in Plano, Texas. They had a server that was in Italy, I believe, and then also Sweden. And so the guy who was responsible for the security was like, I don't like that guy, right? And he was chasing him around the network. And so he didn't see the company, Ericsson, as a victim. He saw himself as a combatant going through that. And then he eventually got arrested by the Swedish secret police, and I think he served like 5 or 6 years. So that is kind of what I would say, right, to prepare for whatever battle you're going to go into, and really talk about the preparations. Right? If you think about anybody that does anything well, they talk about how well they prepare, how they practice, and you also have like game footage that you can see where you can be like, okay, yeah, I believe you when you say that you're one of the best. So did that answer your question?
Yeah, and I think you brought up a good point about preparation, which I think this is something that kind of curious me about, like Randolph, do you think that for every new technology that cybersecurity professionals invent, there's always ways for malicious actors to get around it, right? So when Miguel talked about preparation and we need to prepare and be more preventive, and then something comes up, right? In a most abrupt way, right? So how do you make sure that you can always prepare while you always are facing with a new level of threat that you don't know where it come from, right?
So I think Mike Tyson already answered that, right? You can plan, you prepare, you plan, you prepare, and then you get punched in the face, right? So I think being prepared and having planned gives you good impulses, good instincts, good plans. You know what to do. You have a good idea of what to do. But then reality strikes. One of my personal experiences, I had a very important official job. I was working in Paris. I lived 2 hours away, so I had to go to the office every day by train, 2 hours away. But I was so important. I was happy to do it. And I had important meetings stacked up. And then my phone rang, right? It was my wife. And the next words she said stopped my heart, and all the blood flew from my face. She said, "Randolph, our house is on fire." Right? All of my important duties and meetings vanished. And I got on that train and I went home. And those were the longest 2 hours I've ever spent in my life. And that's why I gave you this timer. And I'd like you to take it home as a reminder of our discussion today, right? Because when a cyber intruder penetrates could penetrate your environment, the clock starts to tick. And every second counts, so that's a gift to you to remember how important it is to have timely responses. That's my response. Thank you.
Thank you, Randolph. I think all of you have a chance to see the little gift that Randolph bring together along with him. And that is an illustration of time, right? Which eventually will cost you something if you lose, right? And I'm going to Ananya now. So since you are covering Asia Pacific and you are much more closer with ASEAN, how does the landscape that Miguel and Randolph just shared as differ for Indonesia? And in terms of positioning as well for countries, like how does Indonesia position in terms of cyber risk profiles in relation with other ASEAN countries?
Absolutely. I think the first thing we got to realize, and I keep talking to my US counterparts all the time when somebody says, hey, let's plan something for ASEAN or APAC. It's not one country, right? We often, kind of club it together. It's a set of 10, 12 different regions, countries, everybody on a different tipping point. Everybody's got different regulation. There's a talent curve that's different in each of the markets. The budgets are different. The socioeconomic landscape is different. If I talk about Indonesia specifically, clouds kind of bursting here, right? We've got bring your own devices since COVID. There's not just one computer that you go in the office for and work on and that's it. There's multiple entry points for these threat actors. That's what it is. I believe we are still catching up, whether it's a regulatory side of the house. We all know, whether it is OJK or the data privacy laws that are yet to be notified. But that's only affecting those who want to do bare minimum, right? If you truly want to be resilient, you got to be proactive. There's no dearth of good tools, and again, that mindset with leadership, the skill set side of the house, all of those things combined.
So there is a need for a holistic approach, right? That's what you meant. And in terms of the profiles as well, like in ASEAN countries, we're speaking of small, medium businesses that covering like more than half of the economy of ASEAN region, right? So how do you make sure that the small companies are adopting the same level of protection with the big companies, right?
Absolutely. So it goes back to what Miguel kind of spoke about, right? You really need to know what your risk appetite is. Simple as that. That's when you know how much you're going to spend on it, how much can you afford to lose as well. On the other side, I mean, a $100 million company having a $10,000 breach, all right, no issues. $1 million starts getting bigger. It's a bigger problem too. Identifying that is important. Whether you're small or big, if you're making money, you're at risk. I think understanding that is important. The tools cater to all sorts of businesses in the market. Again, the mindset, skill set thing, that's not something you can purchase, right? That needs to come from within. And expanding a little bit on what Miguel said, if I put a true business lens on that, we always say that mindset is whether your CEOs, your leaderships, your boards, are they proactive? How top of the list is cybersecurity? And then skill set is whether you have people in-house or are you willing to accept that you need help from somebody? Call it an armor, call it anybody that knows how to do their job the best. So, you don't take away from what you do best. And then obviously it's the tool set, which is the last. So idea is if you're a budding, fintech entrepreneur, CISO, whatever scale you're working on, you are susceptible. Do not for a second think, like Miguel said, that, hey, nobody's attacking me. There's always a threat around.
So being proactive.
Absolutely.
Key takeaway from you. Well noted. And this last question, either for you, Randolph, or Miguel. Since half of the room here is coming from the financial technology industry, why is it important for the financial technology industry to be prudent about mitigating cyber threat risk? Does it share the same level of concern with other industry sectors? Because we heard earlier from Padino as well, like deepfakes, copy of IDs, stolen data, personal data, stolen money from stolen personal data, stolen ID as well. We've seen that case a lot in Indonesia. So I really want to hear from either of you, like, does this share the same level of concern with other industry sectors and how the financial tech industry should be more proactive, as you said, to be able to mitigate these risks?
So why don't we let Randall start with this, and then I'll try to answer anything that he...
I'll start. Thank you. So if I think about the financial sector, it sounds to me like it's one of the most important sectors of the country. If the financial sector breaks down, does the country break down? I mean, right? Right? The other thing is you're often dealing with other people's money, as you were saying. So you have this responsibility which is bigger than for your own money. So I think for those two reasons, the value of the data, the amount of risk, it's tremendously important. So higher, I would say, than other industries, like maybe selling martabak, which I happen to love. But I think the same risk is not there. What would you add?
Okay, so here's what I would add. You're bringing together two things that, one thing is super important, right? Money, everybody cares about money. And then something that people don't understand very well, technology. So if you combine these two things, it would be like, having $1 million on your person and then getting ready to get on an airplane. And you're getting ready on the airplane, but you're bringing a suitcase that somebody you don't know packed. Right? The suitcase that you don't know what's in it, that's technology, because most of us don't know how the technology really works. We don't know what AI is really doing. And then are you willing to risk the $1 million that you have on your person to get stopped by security, customs, either going into the country or leaving with a suitcase that you don't know what's in the suitcase. Like, you have no idea what's there. And they open it up, it's like, how did that get there? I don't know anything about this, right? And so this is the environment that I see that most, like financial tech or anybody that heavily relies on tech, this is exactly the way they're operating every single day. And I'm not advocating for the fact that everybody should become an expert on the tech. What I am advocating for is that people understand that I know I don't understand this technology and how it works, but I want to find out how I'm most vulnerable and then take reasonable steps, right? I find that if you've taken reasonable steps to protect an investment based on how big the investment is and your capabilities, most people will understand, right? To me, that is the only way that an organization can be a victim of a cyber attack and then still not be blamed. Taking those reasonable steps and doing everything that they would do to protect their own money.
You want to ask
Well,
More?
I was just going to add one last thing, right? I was having a super interesting conversation with someone from Microsoft a few days ago, and they said, if you think, Ananya, it's only Russia and Ukraine fighting each other, that's not the case, right? Wars are fought with data, things of national importance. It's your oil and gas businesses, it's your banking that your opposition wants to disable the first. That's how you don't get dollars out of the bank. You can't put your tankers on the roads or whatever it is. So I think knowing where your most important assets, whether it's a digital business or physical, is super important. And getting proactive about those is equally important too.
Thank you. So knowing your risk profiles, knowing how to be proactive, and also mitigating it before it happens are all the keys elements to be able to mitigate cyber threats, right? So thank you. I want to give the floor for questions. All right, we got lots of questions here. I'll give the floor to Pak Parlin dulu ya.
Okay, thank you very much. It's very interesting. And I think I just talked Pak Arif just now, that Indonesia has a law, what it says, personal data protection, it is law number 22. And October this year will be happen. So I can imagine it is very interesting. And what's your view about that? Because we have to protect the personal data protection, not only personal, but it's company. And can be, what I say, not only civil, it can be security resilience. So I need your advice. What should be done to Indonesia? And I think it's the correct time to give ideas to the government, because this must be, the government must be protect all the data of the people. Not only you talk about the security, always about economic and anything. So for example, we have I think Indonesia has the biggest health insurance in the world, 200 million. So all the data is inside.
Yes.
So I need your advice for that. I'm Perlindungan Purba. I'm under him. I'm the chairman for ASEAN Bilateral Committee and Chamber of Commerce Industry. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you, Pak.
Yes, sure. So laws provide penalties, right? They don't fix anything. They just provide a big stick for you to hit a company with when they don't comply. And that's what compliance is there for, is to create a deterrent for organizations to do things poorly, right? And that's all the law can do, right? And it's the same reason why you can't, passing more legislations doesn't change the crime, it just gives the crime fighters better tools, right? And this is exactly the same for that, right? So when you start to think about what do we need to do, you first start with what's at stake, right? If I remember correctly, last year in September, there was a little problem with the health industry and some ransomware here in Indonesia, right? Little problem. Right? Little problem that the leader of the leader of the country is like, please stop hacking us, this hurts. Right? This really hurts, and you guys are really bad people, and I'm asking you to stop. So if the leader of the nation, if that's the only tool he has to fight, is to get on television and to make a plea and say, please stop, right? It's unsatisfactory. You can't do that. So you have to start figuring out, number one, like, what does recovery look like? How long does it take? So you need to know all of those things. I think the militaries provide a really, really good example, right? Because when a military engages in a military operation, they say, this is what we're going to do. You think back to Desert Storm 1. We want to reduce Saddam Hussein's capacity to make war for 10 years. Right? This is a really good goal. It's achievable, it's specific, there's a time limit that's there, you can track it. So if we put cybersecurity into that very same context, now we start to say, how good do we need to be today if we start today? And then we start tracking that. The same way that those of you who raised your hand saying that you have children, if you get a report from one of your teachers that your child has bad grades, you start to track it if you weren't already tracking it, right? Hey, what did you do today? What did you learn today? And we need to have that same kind of intellectual curiosity about cybersecurity and our ability to be able to respond from the attack, right? So if we're thinking top down, it is like, I need to understand how much money it's going to cost when things go wrong, right? And be able to be transparent about that and communicating that to all of the shareholders. If we get this wrong, all the stakeholders, shareholders, whatever, if we get this wrong, this is the impact to the organization, to the company, right? This is what it's going to cost us if we end up losing business. People they want to take their data and shift it away from Indonesia as a result. How much is that going to cost us? Reputational damage, what do we value? And then you figure out how much that's worth, then you start to figure out how much you want to spend. And then that spending is, now let's see how our posture changes, right? It takes us this long to be able to recover. It takes us this long for us to be able to detect an attack. What do we need to do? What technologies need to be in place? In one of the meetings we had yesterday, I always say, people say that they don't have any money, right? It's like, we don't have money for security. We don't have money for security. I would argue that the money always gets spent. From my time in the FBI, there would be somebody gets kidnapped, right? Kidnapping, you'd agree that's a bad thing. If I ask that person if they had money before the kidnapping, no, have no money, can't help you. After the kidnapping, there's always money. So where did the money come from, right? It came from something that they deprioritized because their loved one's life was more important to them, right? And so when you start to think about cybersecurity and how big of a problem it is, you start to deprioritize other things, right? And then you can justify, how much did I deprioritize this? Well, this is how big I've assessed the cyber threat is, right? It's likely millions of dollars. It's likely billions if you get right down to it. And I'm talking billions US, right? That's what the impact likely is. And when you look at what the country is doing against a $1 billion threat, are you, the citizens of the country, are you satisfied that the government is doing enough? Right? Does this look like what you would think, $1 billion problem, how the government would respond to that? Right? If there were an invasion of some sort, you expect the government's going to do something, an impressive show of force. Right? So that's, I think, the thing that really need to figure out is what the countermeasures are going to be, how much are you going to invest in being able to respond to the threat, how quickly can you respond to the threat, how long is it going to take for us to get back to good, if you will, right? Something bad happens, we're bad. How long is it going to take us to get to good? Right? Just like on our way here, we took a taxi, and it's like, well, how long is it going to take to get here? Right? I learned that how far away doesn't matter. I just need to know how long is it going to take to get here. Similar question. Does that answer your question? We can always have another question, conversation offline.
Anan, or anyone want to add? No?
I guess Miguel covered it.
All right.
Kadin.
I want to ask a question about armor, you guys. So if I was a client and I wanted to engage you, what would be the process? Would you do a pen test on my system? Would you just run a quick, what would you, how would you approach if we were, if an association like our AFPI, they want to engage with you guys? How do you do that?
So I will start, and then we'll kind of like move down the row here because we're moving in order of importance, right? I'm the low, and then the next person here, like the native son, right? And then the boss over here. So for me, the first thing that we've already talked about the things that I think the organizations need to do, right, to be able to respond, and then the next thing that you saw was the ability to detect, right? That's very important. So to me, having something like managed detection and response is critically important. And then that needs to have 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days, follow the sun. You need to have a security operations center that's watching that for you. Now, most organizations think, okay, you know what, I can do this myself, right? But in most cases, it's very expensive to do yourself. Right? In order to do it right, you're not going to be able to have your own security operations center and do it right for less than $1.5 million US. right? And you can engage in security partnerships to help you cover that gap so you don't have to spend that, because it doesn't make sense for every business to do that. So after I make that recommendation, you say, you know what, that sounds really good. I'd say, you know what, let's schedule a call with Randolph, and let's kind of think about how do we scope that engagement to best meet your needs.
That's what I would do. And to help understand what best meets your needs, we have what we call a security essential assessment. It's not a pen test per se. We take a look at 25 different points and say, okay, how are you doing this now? And is it good enough? So we look at 25 different security elements. We do an assessment with you. We use your language. We use your responses. There's interviews, and we look at policies, and we walk through it together. And at the end of the day, we see how you are achieving what you want to achieve, and if there's any gaps. It's a very friendly assessment, right? We don't say, man, you guys are really bad. No, we're not going to say that. We're not going to judge you. We're on your side, right? We want to help you look good and be good. So we look at it and say, this is where you are today. Where would you like to be? That's a gap. And then we'll help you prioritize. These are the things that if it were us, we would prioritize these remediation steps. So we do the assessment. We help you prioritize where we think you should act first, and we'll be with you on that journey. That's one way to start.
I think you summarized it well, Randolph. It's partly, it's like going to a doctor, right? You get diagnosed first properly. Only if you get diagnosed first, then can the doctor prescribe something that works for you. If that summarizes it, we usually take customers on a journey. We're not hard selling tools. We're not a company that does that. Like Miguel said, Armor is a managed detection and response business, right? The idea is let's find where the gaps are. Let's help you plug them, because cybersecurity never ends. It's not a means to an end exercise. You've done it today, tick the box, great. You're going to have zero-day attacks. You're going to have threat actors that are 2 steps ahead of you always, as long as you're doing business. So it's a journey, and that's where we kind of partner with you. That's the word. Engage with you, not just hard sell tools.
Hello, my brothers. Thank you very much for the time. Bagarisa. Zarif, it's a pleasure to meet you all. Based on what your station before, I might jump into that are only 3 types of companies in cybersecurity. One who hasn't been hacked yet. I'm gonna word yet. So one is the one who hasn't been hacked yet. I'm going to add the word yet. 2, who has been hacked. 3rd is the one who has been hacked but didn't know about it. That is the most crucial thing when it comes to cybersecurity. But unfortunately, the one that I've learned in cybersecurity, the right and wrong is not always crystal clear. It's not always crystal clear. So I'm making notes. You may add one another to make the answer more profound and comprehensively. So when it comes to the company, how do we balance the need to be secure with the need to protect our privacy? Because those two sometimes becomes either you're right or you're wrong. It's in between. So how do you can give us a little bit of insight and information on the need to be secure or the need to protect our privacy? Because what, like Pak said, in October 2024, the PDP law is going to be imposed by the government of Republic of Indonesia. And it comes with so many things that we are, just to be honest with you, we're kind of scared with the law, with the regulations and the law. So thank you very much for your answer about that. Thank you.
Maybe I'll take a stab, and Miguel, you can add to that. So I think this is a wonderful question, right? Super. You definitely saw the presentation and absorbed it really well. I think whenever countries have passed laws, compliance to what Miguel kind of said earlier, that is a starting point. That's not a hey, it's everything. That's bare minimum, quite literally, because the country is saying, hey. Well, how are you disposing the data really? Privacy data, well, data privacy is about that, when somebody gives you their email ID, your date of birth, what are you doing with it? And there's always steps to, dispose that data, keep that data for safekeeping and whatnot. So those are procedures, policies that I'm guessing a lot of enterprises here are going to have to, take a good hard look at what they do and how they do, those things. But then cybersecurity as a whole doesn't just stop at data, right? You've got your intellectual property, for example. You've got your physical assets. You've got softwares that you're developing in day in, day out. So it's also a how are you secure by design conversation, right? On one hand, you kind of say, hey, shift left, automation, secure everything right in, early on in your SDLC and whatnot. And then you've got your data lakes and databases and whatever data you're collecting on the other hand, which becomes a part of that overall thing. I think those could go hand in hand very well. You just need programs that are not disparate or tools that are not disparate and talking to each other. To you, Miguel.
Okay, so if I can remember your question, you talked about balance, right? When I think about balance, I think that there's no right answer, and that the point on which you're balancing, like a fulcrum point, is always moving, and so you're always doing this, balancing between protection and availability, right? And where you land as an organization is really going to depend on your tolerance for risk, okay? If you're dealing with somebody else's money like a bank, how tolerant are banks for errors on the ledger? 0, right? Like you close business at the end of the day, you balance, or you don't close your business, right? Now you start to think about other businesses that may have a different kind of risk tolerance for things. It's like, yeah, as long as I get close, right? It doesn't matter too much, right? We in sales, kind of like we don't care about the pennies as much, right? The dollars we care about, and maybe tens and hundreds and maybe thousands we care about, but we don't need to go to the penny. And that's because we are more tolerant of risk, right? So when you start to think about finance, for the most part, unless you're talking about investments, and there's a lot of risks that's associated with investments, but the rate of return is based on the amount of risk that you're willing to accept at the end of the day, right? And so you have to bring that same concept of which investments am I going to invest in from a risky standpoint versus a safe standpoint. That's all based on, those are decisions that are made usually above any one person's pay grade. So my recommendation is find somebody in the organization, usually at the top of the organization, to own the posture that you have, right? And once you own that posture, you say, you know what, we value protection more than availability. And as a result, all of you are going to have to suffer. No USBs anymore, right? It's going to be two-factor authentication. You got to change your password every 5 minutes, right? If it's that important to you, you do that, right? So time in, working for the government, that's the way that we were, right? They didn't care about how convenient it was for us, but they have unclassified data, secret data, top secret data, and they understand the value of that. Like top secret stuff would have grave consequences for the entire nation. And so they make it difficult for you to access it, difficult to use it. It's a pain in the neck, and more often than not, it's not worth the effort to use it. And they do that on purpose. And so it's that same idea. And not all the data that you have in your organization is all worth the same, right? So anybody in the room that raised their hands that said that they have more than one child, that has children, who has more than one child? Throw your hands up. Okay. So you have a situation, in this imaginary situation, you have a child, you have two children that are in danger. Let's say they're both hanging over the cliff. Former FBI agent friend shows up. Hey, I'm here to help you. Which one of your kids do you want me to save? Right? You don't want me to make that decision. You want to make that decision. Now, we both know the answer. You're going to save your favorite child, right? And you will, like for sure, for sure you will, right? And you will do that, right? This is the question that you've asked. Which child do I save? And it's up to somebody to say, hey, you know what? This is the one that you need to save, and this is why.
Well, maybe if your FBI friend shows up, you save one and he saves another, right? So please
hoping
consider
that's where
that.
you were going. We get them both.
Right, if that's an option, you save them both, right? But if you had known that that was an option, there'd be no reason to ask your question, right? Let's make it a difficult question because these are difficult questions, right? They're difficult to answer. And if anybody cringed at the idea as to which one of my children do you save, they're twins, right? Like, how do I choose? Like, I'm lucky to be able to say which one is which, you know? But when you tell the story afterwards about how you made the decision to save which child, you'll be able to articulate what that decision is. And to not decide means you lose both of them, right? So it's the same cybersecurity dilemma, but now it's really, really personal for each of us and unlikely to forget it going forward, right? And so now we know what kind of difficult questions we need to ask when we start to think about policy and balancing availability of data with how we're going to secure that, right? And then what fits our particular posture given the quantity of risk we have for our business today.
All right. Any one last question? Okay, we got our last question here.
Okay, thank you for the time. I'm Alit from Investor Trust. And so my question is, so cybersecurity has become a necessity for the corporation, especially in this era of digitalization. So my question is, what if the company have the funding issues to spend on the cybersecurity? And the second one is, how important is the cooperation of the countries in the region, such as ASEAN, to establish synergies regarding the cybersecurity? Thank you.
All right, two questions. One is the money, the funding, and the second one is cooperation between ASEAN regions to tackle cyber threats.
I'll take a stab at that. I guess the answer to your first question, and both great questions, right? The first question is simple. Either you have the money to cough up for a ransom, or you have the money to put on tools and the right people and the right processes, right? Now, as far as ASEAN cooperation is concerned, I think I was reading news a couple of months ago where Singapore's kind of put together, I can't really, tell the name now, can't remember, but a central SOC for all of the ASEAN countries to share information with each other. It is actually a site within Singapore. We've got like 50s and hundreds of security analysts and engineers kind of sitting there in the office, sharing information, just like some of the Intel communities do, Miguel. So the whole point is, if Singapore's had a breach or an incident, how do you learn about it before you get breached too? So there's that common knowledge sharing. You get better at how you respond to those things. You understand the magnitude of what those attacks could be, and could well stop them before they are on your systems for like 275 days. Does that answer your question?
Miguel, you want to add something?
See, every time I
Are you trying to get away from it?
Every time I try to be good. So I just want to circle back to the point that there's always money, right? Whenever something bad happens, there's always money. So people who don't have money will pay for surgery. People who don't have money will fly and they'll go on vacation or they'll do nice things. So there's always money. There's just the decision that you need to make, where do I want to spend that money? And to underscore that point, if it's before the incident, you're deciding where to spend the money. If it's after the incident, the adversary is deciding where to spend the money, right? That is really the question that you really want to ask yourself. Do you want somebody else deciding where you spend your money, right? And if you have that opportunity, you can say, okay, I'm going to spend, and that's what this risk management conversation has been about. I'm going to spend a certain amount of money up front so that I can predict where my problems are going to be or most likely to be, and then make sure that I'm prepared to minimize the impact. So think of it like a fire, right? If a fire starts and it breaks out and it's right there and we put that fire out, right? Like this this thing that Randolph brought here. Let's say it's a fire hazard and it's right there and the fire starts, and somebody puts that fire out in less than a minute. There's really no impact that's there, right? But if that fire burns for a week or 2 weeks, then there's going to be a big impact. So the ability to detect, and then having a capability to take action against whatever threat you're likely to face. And again, it's reasonable, right? You don't have to do unreasonable things. The likelihood of being hit by a meteor very low, so you don't need to do something special to protect yourself against something like that. But for the things that you're likely to face in an everyday business environment that's heavily reliant on information, then you figure out what the reasonable thing is to do, get with some people so that you're not making that decision alone, right? Get with some other folks. Anytime you have important decisions, most of us don't make them alone, right? And we don't make them quickly if we don't have to. If we have the benefit of time, we get together with people that we trust, seek some counsel, some advice from professionals, people who have more experience, do the reasonable things that need to be done, and then say, okay, this is what the plan is, and you communicate that to all the stakeholders. If we go back to the children and they're both in danger, you would tell your child today, it's like, hey, don't go anywhere near any cliffs because I've chosen to save your brother, right? Like that, these are the conversations that you're gonna wanna have, or your sister, whatever the case may be. So you plan, right? You've communicated what your plans are to the shareholders, the stakeholders, so they can start preparing their own defenses. So this is kind of what I would say, right? Because it's not just one threat that's there. I mean, this is a threat that goes kind of across the board, and it's shared by all of the different stakeholders that are there. So get them involved in the solution, get them to put some what I would call skin in the game, and figure out what you're going to do collectively. So hopefully that answers your question.
All right. I think we're nearing the end of our discussion, and I hope it's very insightful for everyone here. I would just like to have one last closing statement from each and every one of you, just a quick one for everyone as a takeaway here today. So I'll start with Ananya.
Yeah, sure. I think cybersecurity is a journey. However big or small you are, take the first step. Call on someone like us, right? We are here to help. We are here to partner. That's one. On a lighter note, whenever you want to talk about risk, or quantifying risk, which a lot of us don't do a good job of, call Miguel. If your kids are hanging by a cliff, don't call Miguel.
Thank you for that. My one word would be, don't be overconfident. That's 3 words, right? But I think a lot of business owners and family owners, we all tend to think if it happens, it's probably going to happen over there to somebody else. But I tell you, when you get that phone call and you learn that your house is on fire, all that delusion is not important anymore. So I would say don't be overconfident. Prepare.
Okay. Each of you in the room are professional risk managers for your own lives and your own business, right? So don't let cybersecurity folks like me or us try to confuse you with technology, because protecting yourself is pretty simple, right? If you had to protect yourself, if you are aware of a threat and the threat is going to be right there, you don't go there, right? The concept is very, very simple and everyone can approach it. In technology, cybersecurity with tools, we want to confuse people with the technologies. And I would say that you don't allow us to do that, because the concepts are very, very simple. And so what that means then is everybody in the room, everybody who's watching Facebook Live, everybody that listens, you can make a difference in cybersecurity. And people are going to tell you that you can, or that you don't know enough, or you don't have the technical skills. You don't need that. You can really make a difference by asking insightful questions, right? Like, how long is it going to take to recover, right? How do you know? Why are you so confident about that? Do you have a guarantee? Why aren't you giving me a guarantee? So you can engage those conversations, and people will use the tech so that they don't have to answer your difficult questions. But continue to ask those difficult questions as we go on this journey to make a meaningful difference in the cyber war.
Thank you so much. Give it a round of applause for all 3 of our speakers today, Miguel, Randolph, and Ananya. So I think Since you asked, right, the key takeaway from my side today. So I think we all can agree today that, understanding the cost is very important. Being proactive is also very important. And also having the right mindset and tool set for resiliency. That's also very important. So that's my key takeaway as promised. And I hope that everyone here today enjoyed the discussion so far. And thank you for your participation. And I hope to see you next time. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat sore semuanya. Terima kasih atas partisipasinya hari ini. Kami undur diri dulu. Saya undur diri, Karisa, dari hari ini mewakili Kadin dan ASEAN BAC. Terima kasih.
For sure.